Chapter 25. Norman had the door of his shop well barred. Trade had fallen off to such an alarming degree that, but for serving old Pete with his newspaper and tobacco, there seemed to be no point whatever in opening. Absolute panic and the fear of his duplicate's return, or possibly the arrival of something far worse, had prompted him this day, upon the ancient's departure, to barricade the premises against the outside world. The Countess now stood across the front door, with what few items still remained stacked upon them. Viewing the hole in his ceiling, Norman considered these moves to be little more than token opposition, but even token opposition was surely better than no opposition at all. "Many hands make light work," said the shopkeeper, irrelevantly recalling a faith-healing session he had once attended, where a defunct fuse box, which had thrown the place into darkness, had been miraculously restored to life. Norman tottered over the newly laid linoleum. Wielding his screwdriver Excalibur fashion, he entered the kitchenette. There wasn't a lot of room in there at present. The object of his most recent, all-consuming attention occupied more than a little floor space. Norman's time machine was a big filler. There was very much of the electric chair evident in the overall design of the thing, but also a good deal of NASA's mission control and a fair degree of Captain Nemo's Nautilus. A soupçon of the pumping station at Kew and Dr. F's laboratory completed the picture. The thing bristled with the banks of twinkling lights Norman always felt was so essential to lend the necessary atmosphere to such a project. Above the driving seat, commandeered from his Morris Minor, a slim brass wheel turned at precisely 26 revolutions per minute. From the axle rods, wires trailed to every compass point like the ribbons of an eccentric electronic maypole, enshrouding the entire contraption, which rested upon a kind of Father Christmas-type sleigh. "Now then," Norman consulted a ludicrous wiring diagram scrawled onto the back of a computer stock control printout. It was all something to do with E equaling mc squared, the parallax theory, whatever that might be, and the triangulations of Pythagoras. Oh yes, and the space-time continuum, not that that even bore thinking about. Norman shook his head at the wonder of it all. Scientists always did tend to overcomplicate the issues. Professional pride, he supposed. To him, science was, and always had been, a pretty straightforward affair, which required only the minimum of writing down. Once he had nicked the idea, and this time from H.G. Wells, you simply went down to Keir's Electrical in the High Street, purchased all the component parts. What you couldn't buy, you hobbled up out of defunct wirelesses and what was left of the Meccano set. Scientists always made such a big deal out of things and made everything so complicated. Norman was the happy exception to this rule. Brentford seemed to be in a bit of a shtuck at the present, but the shopkeeper considered that once he had the machine on the go, he would at least be able to set matters straight once and for all. He always liked to think that he was helping out, and seeing as how nobody had cared to put him in the picture, he meant to go it alone. Not being at all silly, he had tracked down the root cause of the parish's ills to the dreaded Latanos and Romith concern, and it seemed but a simple thing to him to slip back into the past, make a few subtle changes, like murdering the rat-bags where they slept in their cribs for a first off, then bending the council records so he got that planning permission to do his loft conversion, and he'd always wanted to shake the hand of that editor of the Brentford Mercury who had run off with his wife. There was quite a lot you could achieve once you'd got time travel licked. Norman had definitely decided to travel backwards first. The future looked anything but rosy. He dived forward with his screwdriver into an impenetrable-looking network of wires and fuse boxes and twiddled about here and there. The strains of the Rolling Stones' legendary composition "Time Is On My Side" sprang almost unconsciously to his lips. The whole concept of the Enterprise pleased Norman with its every single detail. There was the sheer naked thrill of hurtling into the unknown, allied with the potential power a man might wield once able to traverse the fields of time. Also, and by no means the smallest part of it, was the infinite variety of puns and proverbs that could be drawn from the word time. Such things must never be overlooked. "Time, gentlemen, please," said Norman, tittering loudly to himself. He flicked a random selection of likely-looking switches in the hope that he might get some clue as to why he'd fitted them. One brought his old bush radiogram bucketing into life. Each time for old time, sang a disembodied voice. Norman creased up. He was having the time of his life. The shopkeeper straightened his back and scratched at his head with the end of his screwdriver. It did all look about finished, really. He could always tighten up the odd bolt or give the gleaming brasswork another polish, but apart from these niceties, it looked very much complete. "And not before time?" chuckled Norman, making nudging notions towards an imaginary companion. The sounds of sharp tapping suddenly drew his attention. Someone or something was knocking upon the barricaded shop door. An icy hand clutched at the shopkeeper's heart. Of course, it could be just a customer anxious to pay his newspaper bill. Well, it could be. The Latanos and Romith computer scan monitored Norman's infrared image as it dithered about in the crowded kitchenette. The sensors gauged the increase in his pulse rate and analysed the sweat particles which broke out on his forehead. It also relayed this information instantly to the shopkeeper's mirror image, which was even now rapping left-handedly upon the door. A cruel smile appeared upon the duplicate's face as it turned and strode purposefully away, bound for the backyard wall. Norman gnawed upon his knuckles. Now would certainly seem like an ideal time for a bit of a test run. He climbed rapidly into the driving seat and fastened his safety belt. As he had no way of telling exactly which way up time was when he travelled through it, he did not wish to fall out. Carefully, he swung a pair of great caliper arms, heavily burdened with switch boxes and levers about him, and, turning the ignition key, put the machine into reverse. Lights pulsed and flashed, and the great brazen wheel tumbled on above him. A ring of sparks encircled the machine in a twinkling halo. The sudden crash of brickwork informed the aspiring time-traveller that an unwelcome visitor had just entered his backyard. The buzzing and hammering of the mechanism increased at a goodly rate, but to Norman's dismay he did not appear to be going anywhere, either backwards or forwards or even upside down. "Get a move on!" shouted the distraught shopkeeper, thumbing switches and squinting up at the kitchen clock in the hope of a fluctuation. The machine shook and shivered, the lights flashed and the engine roared. The sounds of splintering woodwork as the kitchen door parted company with its hinges were swallowed up in the cacophony. Norman's fearsome replica stood in the doorway, clearing its throat and rubbing its hands together. Norman flung levers in all directions and waggled the joystick. The creature stalked towards him wearing a most unpleasant expression. It reached down slowly and grasped one of the runners, meaning to upend the whole caboodle. Norman cowered back in his seat, kicking at any levers which lay beyond his reach. The creature strained at the runner, but the thing would not shift. Norman stared up at the great wheels spinning above. Its gyroscopic effect was such that the machine could not possibly be overturned. The robot, being Norman to its finger ends, twigged this almost instantaneously and abandoned its futile pursuit to deal with matters more directly. Its hands stretched towards Norman's throat. The wee lad shrank away, burbling for mercy. The demon double clawed towards him, its eyes blazing hatred and its lips drawn back from gnashing, grinding teeth. The talons were an inch from Norman's throat. Norman unceremoniously wet himself. Not the wisest thing to do when surrounded by so much unearthed electrical apparatus. Norman's voice rose to an operatic soprano as the charge caught him squarely in the nuts, arched up his backbone, and shot out through the top of his head, setting his barnet ablaze. A great jolt rocked the machine. Sparks cascaded Roman candle style from every corner, and the humming and throbbing rose to a deafening crescendo. As if suddenly alert to the possibility of imminent explosion, the robot drew back its hands. It dropped them once more to the runner, then straightened up and back towards the door. Norman battered at his cranial bonfire and squinted through the now rising smoke. To his amazement, he saw the creature back away through the doorway, and the shattered kitchen door magically rise behind it to slap back into its mountings, pristine and undamaged. Norman's glance flew towards the kitchen clock. The second hand was belting round the face like a propeller. It was travelling anti-clockwise. Norman clapped his hands together and bounced up and down in his seat, oblivious to his scrambled ghoulies and smouldering topknot. He was travelling back in time. The second hand was gathering speed, increasing to a blur, followed now by the minute and the hour. The kitchenette began to grow vague and fuzzy, and then in a flash it vanished. The kitchenette door tore from its hinges and crashed down on the linoleum. Norman's duplicate stood horribly framed in a doorway, staring to the fog of smoke which now filled the otherwise emptied room. A look of perplexity swept over the robot shopkeeper's face. Data retrieval and logic modification channels whirred and cross-meshed, and finally spelt out absolutely sweet damn all.